So, Mr. Jansa, I would like to thank you very much for taking the time to agree to do this interview. It's really been an honor and a pleasure to have you here for our large annual conference, A World Without Walls 2010, an international conference on peace building, reconciliation, and globalization in an interdependent world. I'd like to begin our interview by asking you to maybe give us some remarks. What are your impressions of the discussions that you've heard over the last few days, where we're trying to expand the field of cultural diplomacy to include also peace building and reconciliation? What are your initial impressions from the discussions that you've heard over the last few days?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I found these discussions very interesting. Some of them as a birthplace for new ideas, which is, I think, the most welcome. And I think that the main issues we dealt with were the issues of the biggest importance for solving today's problems and also for the future. Soft power is becoming more and more important. Even in those areas where conflicts were stopped by military intervention, we need to use soft power for reconciliation, for building stable societies, which can be able to prevent such conflicts in the future. But soft power is even more important for overall prevention of conflicts. And I think that this is an approach which has not only the future in politics, but this is the future of the positive approach to every important matter in the world, which we have to solve in the future.
Let me ask you a follow-up question related to that. The world faces many challenges and potential uncertainty over the coming years. What essential role can policies of soft power and cultural diplomacy play in overcoming differences to promote greater cooperation and, most importantly, peace and reconciliation? And maybe you could even give a few examples where you see an opportunity for soft power.
I think that opportunities for soft power lay everywhere. It's the main question is how to recognize those opportunities and how to invest enough efforts to be successful. So institutes like Institute for Cultural Diplomacy and similar are of great importance, not only to involve experts and young people into those problems, but also to develop concrete ideas, how to solve some issues, and most important, how to build support for those ideas. Politics is pragmatic things. Politicians depend on voters. Voters are, this is public, voters are composed by public, and if we work with public, if we work with the people on different level, then we are creating sufficient energy, which itself means soft power. And we can influence also decisions on the high levels, also in the cases when we don't think this is possible. So these grassroots activities are basis for everything.
That's good. I mean, to follow up again more specifically, as we know, Professor Joseph Nye at Harvard University coined this term soft power over 20 years ago at the end of the Cold War. And he was talking about soft power related to hard power. In your own words, how would you define soft power, or how would you differentiate soft power from hard power?
Well, I can make this difference with the explanation of our case of Slovenia. Slovenia was part of former Yugoslavia. This was a totalitarian country. Slovenians were 8% of the population. Hard power in our case was Yugoslav military army, Yugoslav People's Army, strong military force, the fifth in Europe at that time. And if we compare hard power of Slovenia and hard power of our opponents, we would have no chances. So we used soft power, negotiations. We offered different possibilities how to rearrange the country. We tried to influence also people inside the military, not to use brutal force against their own people. We tried to negotiate. We tried to build personal links with those people, and at the end, when conflict unfortunately arose, the price we paid was very small, because we used this soft power before. We tried everything to solve the problem without using of arms, of military force and so on. So it worked. At the end it worked, but at the beginning nobody believed this is possible. So we just used different pattern of thinking. We didn't compare tanks and warplanes and so on. We used soft power. We used all other means, and we were successful. So this is the difference.
Or would you agree that the success, I guess in the case of Slovenia, was what, let's say, Hillary Clinton is referring to also as smart power, or this combination of the hard and the soft?
Well, it was more combination of smart and soft power, but soft power itself is smart power. If you use soft power, you have to be smart. It's very easy to use brutal force. You don't need much knowledge. You don't need you don't have to be very wise to do it. If you want to do something, if you want to achieve a positive goal, without force, without brutal facts, then you have to be wise. You have to be wise. You have to be smart, and you have to know the resources.
We were reflecting a little bit this morning about the wonderful lecture that you gave yesterday, where the focus was on the unspoken crime of genocide. How can we address the current lack of action from the international community, the vast majority of which are signatories to the Convention on the Prevention of Punishment for Genocide, in regards to those instances of genocide, when and where they occur?
There are many reasons for that. One of it lies in the structures of international organizations, especially United Nations, because the structure of United Nations itself can lead to a situation when those world powers with the veto power in Security Council can influence the reactions, can pick the cases, can use the double standards. And this has happened, unfortunately, many times during last decades. But the second reason is also the not sufficient role of medias, of civil society. There were many cases where so-called world public opinion simply didn't work. People were not interested. They were involved in their own problems, sometimes economic crisis, sometimes financial crisis, sometimes political affairs. Countries before the elections are not sensitive to the problems outside them, and so on. So there is outside of this problem how to reorganize the institutions and the United Nations and so on. There is a wide space of opportunities where we can do many things, and with doing this we can influence also the changes in institutions. So it's not enough to concentrate only on the procedures and institutions themselves, because if we are realists, we know that some goals there cannot be achieved in few years or even 10 years period, But there are other opportunities which are realistic, and we have to stick to them.
Okay. Genocide is the most extreme example of a cultural division and mistrust. How can cultural diplomacy play a long-term role in reconciling difficult histories and educating people so that such a terrible thing as genocide will truly never happen again?
I think that education is crucial. Education is crucial, and I think that one global action which should lead to well, implementing the matter of the universal human rights into the school programs all around the world on the same basis. I think that one single chapter explaining the universal human rights based on the UN Charter of Human Rights, teach in all primary and secondary schools around the world, is something which can make difference. This is not the case now. Even in the European Union, in many states, this is not the part of the curriculum. This is not the part of the educational system. Young people don't know that this exists. They don't know. They know their basic rights because they meet this matter through their life and different subjects. But it is not included in the curriculum, in the programs of the schools. And this is even more important for Asian or African countries, where there is complete lack of awareness that something as basic human rights exists. This is, and I heard for some discussions, well, during some sessions of General Assembly of United Nations, there were some proposals, but there were no real action how to do this. And I think this is the basis. If people are not aware of their rights, then there are no chances that we can do something from outside. At the beginning, there is personality. There is one single person, and he has to be aware of his own rights.
So I agree with you. I think education, of course, is crucial. If you think of how many cases in the world there are individuals who don't grow up with the proper access to education about their own histories, let alone histories of the rest of the world. The international community has actually signed on to it, but for some reason, for many reasons, it's not being implemented. So thank you for elaborating on those two cases. We, I think, at the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy are recognizing also the occasion that we have now here in Berlin to ask ourselves, what was the significance 21 years ago of the fall of the Berlin Wall? We're asking also at the Institute not only what was the significance for Berlin, but what was the significance for Europe and for the rest of the world. What role, in your opinion, will the European Union play to tackle the major challenges facing the world in the next 2 decades? Will its present legal, political, and economic structures be up to the task? And if not, what needs to be done?
Actually, the fall of the Berlin Wall was a very crucial event. Before the fall of the Berlin Wall, before these democratic revolutions arose in Eastern Europe and before these changes, Europe was divided itself. And this means it was locked into its own continental problem. The 90% of its power, soft and hard, was wasted inside. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, after unification of Europe, most resources were free for Europeans to deal also with the problems outside of the Europe. The European Union itself is a success story. It has had its own failures and wrong cases and so on, but overall it is a great success story. 50 years ago this was the dream, mostly. Now it's a success story. European Union is the most wanted place for millions non-Europeans where they want to live, when they want to travel, when they want to learn something, and so on. So, and European Union, United Europe, is a vast reservoir of soft power. which is working even now. European Union itself, it's the biggest aid donor, development aid donor to developing countries. European Union is involved in almost all important peacekeeping missions. European Union was able, after first failures, to positively affect the development on the Western Balkans, preventing many conflicts which could easily arise without this encouragement from European Union. And now it is, I think it is time for European Union to play the key role in solving three most important international issues, three most important global issues. This is peace and stability in the world, fight against poverty and climate change. In this last one, when the fight against climate change is on the table, European Union is already playing leading role, because the European standards, European ecological standards are the beacon for all other world. I remember my visit in China a few years ago, state visit in China, when Chinese Prime Minister Wen Jiabao told me, please go ahead with implementing those ecological standards for the cars. Because when European Union will implement those standards, we will follow immediately. Because it is much easier for us to do this, not to argue among ourselves if this is economically good or not. Because when European Union does something, that this is standard. And European Union succeeded to implement, for instance, this specific case, to implement very high ecological standard for car emissions. And China indeed followed this example. But European Union is not very successful so far when the word peace and stability, when this problem is on the table, because sometimes European Union is divided in United Nations. There are countries from European Union which are members of the security, permanent members of the Security Council with the veto power, and so on. So I think that in the future European Union will play a much bigger role when also European foreign policy will be more united, when there will be one voice in G20, in International Monetary Fund, in World Bank, and also in United Nations. But this time is coming with the new Lisbon Treaty. European Union is taking a better position, better coordination. This is not only new bureaucracy, what were remarks when the Lisbon Treaty was ratified. It is also a new possibility and also new surroundings for creating soft power to solve world problems.
It's true, and it sounds like the more consensus Europe can have on the key issues, whether it's climate change or peace building, the stronger the soft power then would be. And it sounds like the case you just mentioned with China is a perfect example. As soon as Europe did reach that consensus, then China followed. So that gives us hope maybe for the future, but it also gives us a lot of work. The larger that the European Union gets, of course, the more challenging it can be to get those consensus. But it sounds like we have a true Europeanist at heart, Mr. Jansa. Let's take it one step further, actually. We were discussing also the significance of the fall of the Berlin Wall, not only for Europe, but for the world. Over the last few days, we had a number of discussions and debates about the United Nations. Some were more critical, some were very supportive, especially on the issue of genocide. What role, in your opinion, will the United Nations play in dealing with the major challenges facing the world in the next 2 decades? In its current form, will it be up to the task? And if not, what needs to be done?
Well, I think that United Nations will play a key role in the future. The only question is if this role will be sufficient. In next decades there won't be another similar organization established. We will speak about the reforms of United Nations, but the organization will stay and it will develop. I hope so. But United Nations to be more efficient, United Nations to be more united, United Nations to be an organization without double standards. I think we have to concentrate also on the regional organizations as European Union is, with the ambitions, those regional organizations to become a tool sometimes of United Nations to solve the problems. Not discussing this too wide, I can give the example of Africa. You know, if for instance, to be completely concrete, if peacekeepers come to Sudan from United States or from United Kingdom or from some other European countries, which some of them were in the past colonial powers there, they have no starting basis to build the trust, and they are refused. People there refuse them because they still see something. They still see in their presence some old patterns and so on. They are not present, but okay. These fears are irrational, but they have their own sources. If there is African Union functioning similar as European Union, with their own resources, with their own peacekeeping troops, with their own police force, which can, according to the resolutions of United Nations, protect those refugees, for instance, in Chad or in Darfur, then this would be a completely different story. But this is not the case now. So European Union, United Nations, also United States, China also, which is not poor country anymore, and it has great interests in Africa. They all have to contribute resources to establish African Union, in this case, as a functioning regional organization with its own resources. Then this would make difference.
No, Chairman, as you were saying, it sounds like the key ingredient missing, that element which is actually most vital for this cooperation to take place, is actually trust. We don't need to agree with each other, we don't need to even like each other, but we need to trust each other, whether it's the African Union or the United Nations. That seems to be the most crucial challenge in the world. And perhaps that might also be where cultural diplomacy could assist in at least strengthening those relationships to allow for the trust to come. And then I think, as you were saying, the resources coming from the own initiative of the national countries can, I think, have an impact. To conclude, I would like to come back to Slovenia. You discussed the European, you discussed the United Nations. Let's come back to Slovenia. In your opinion, what can we learn from Slovenia in terms of resolving and reconciling between different ethnic groups and countries? How has Slovenia fostered cooperation with its near neighbors, who have had a difficult and a divided recent past?
Well, I think that speaking about this matter, Slovenia is quite positive example, because immediately after taking this safe exit from former Yugoslavia, because this was only option, which was only positive option which was on the table. All other options hadn't worked. Slovenia established good relations with other parts of former Yugoslavia. Good relations with complete neighborhood. We established diplomatic relations immediately with all states which arise in the Western Balkans. We established very intensive economic, political cooperation, also cooperation among NGOs, civil society, and Slovenia is the biggest advocate of EU membership for those countries. People from Slovenia are working with the civil servants, with the administration, with the politicians, with the business people all around the Western Balkans, helping them to implement European standards, teaching them how to negotiate, to open close the chapters which needs to be closed or open for fulfilling all conditions to entering European Union. So I think this is something which is not only our story. This is widely recognized. It's widely recognized. And during my capacity of Prime Minister, I traveled and I dealt with this area very intensively. And Slovenia was recognized not only inside the Europe but worldwide as an expert for this region, as somebody who can contribute good ideas but also well, concrete help for the region. And every time when during the sessions of European Council or different European institutions, European Parliament, this issue was on the agenda. Slovenia was first country called to express its opinion, and it was more or less leading guidance how to solve these problems. And in some very difficult cases, we were quite successful. This is one part of our neighborhood. Second part of our neighborhood is our western countries, Italy and Austria, and also with both countries we immediately after declaring independence we established all relations. Now there is no border anymore between Slovenia, Italy, Austria and Hungary. We are all inside the Schengen space, and first time after 1 century also Slovenians living in Austria or in Italy, they can meet each other without crossing the border, without paying taxes and so on. So it is great change. It is great change, and if you ask average Slovenian if he or she expected this development 20 years ago, he or she would say no. So it's very important to be aware that it's not the pure strength or the numbers of the country or of one group is something what matters. There are also other things, and the basis is, as I said before, personality, and if we have the same values, or if we share the same basic values, if we are aware of our rights, if you have the same knowledge, this is the sovereignty of the personality, and on this basis we can build also the world without walls.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was my great pleasure.